going to go ahead and get started. I'll let, some of you guys, Rick doubles as my IT guy and don't have any problems with the projector.
Numbers there.
Exactly.
It is, yes.
I'll let Rick talk about his background, but we're glad to have him. This is about, this focus is about insider threats, but I guess just threats overall. I've had, you'll appreciate this, I've had 2 phone calls from the TV stations in town talking about basically hacking incidents and wanting me to basically tee somebody up. So this is more, the most recent one was about a woman whose baby monitor was hacked.
Oh my gosh.
And so, what can be put in place to keep, that baby monitor from being hacked? And so, but Rick is not here to talk about external threats. I guess he's here to talk about internal threats. And Rick, I'll let you kind of smaller group today, so we can have a little informality and just kind of take it from there. Just a little bit of background and then roll into it.
All right, well, thank you. Real quick, he did say it's informal. I like smaller groups. So if something doesn't make sense, if you got a question, stop me. I know this presentation well enough. It's my second time walking through it in different forms or flavors. But what I'll do is I'll just stop and I can skip some slides. I've got some good examples that will kind of point you in some directions of thinking about some things. So who am I? I work for a small company called InterClips. And I will breeze through these slides and give you like maybe the 30-second of who InterClips is and why we're here. We're a small business. We were founded almost 11 years ago now. And our purpose has been to do software solutions. So we have a lot of software developers, software engineers within our company. And we like to work in that sweet spot, I would say, software integration. So we're coming into our customer sites. We're solving problems. We like to solve unique problems with technology that they have, technology that they understand, and based on the people that they have. Because we find the biggest problem with a lot of companies when you come in with a solution is they say, we've got this great product that solves all your problems, and every one of us knows that doesn't actually happen. So we like to feel out our customers and we like to bring those solutions to them. Now, why do I have this slide up here? These are all of our core values. One of the things I like to do is just point out a couple of things. Mission for our customers is probably one of the things. We focus on our customers, everything from the type of people we hire, how we mentor them, how we cultivate them, how we build them up, so that we can actually do what I would say is do it right the first time. We want to make sure that we can walk away from a solution and allow the customer to own it, understand it, and manage it themselves without us. Now, personally, what do I like? People is one of the reasons I came on board with the company. They have a focus not only on growing the people technologically within their careers, but also giving them the flexibility to grow personally in those areas that are outside the life. We want to make sure that we can guide and direct our employees to grow them so that they're happy. And if you think about an insider threat, they're not doing something malicious to one of our customers or doing something malicious to destroy the business that they're working for. Now, lots of buzzwords up here. If you look in the top right-hand corner of that slide, I like to point this out. I find it frank. I've gotten a lot of comments about it. We're not unique. You can walk through these buzzwords and you can find a dozen companies out there that do things just as well as we do. But what do I like to point out that's unique about us? And that's the diversity of our customers, the diversity of the way that we work with our customers. Our goal is to work with the customers, with our employees, for a common goal. We're trying to accomplish their solutions. If you want to use a buzzword or tagline, we're trying to develop solutions for the customers by the customers.
All right, so the name InterClips.
Yes.
Am I the only one that doesn't know what clip? I know what inter means, but
I'll
clips.
explain it real quick.
Okay.
I want to breeze through these slides. So I just mentioned this, right? We love supporting our customers as a subcontractor. We like to work underneath primes. We like to be the geeks behind the scenes solving the problems so that we don't have to get wrapped up in program management experience. We realize that we have to do it. We don't mind doing it, but we try to get in and to be those technical geeks behind the scenes. Now, what does InterClips stand for? There you go. So interface. It was built between two words, interface and eclipse. So interfacing with our customers, interfacing with our employees, interfacing with those people that are working with us, and what is our goal? To basically eclipse the competition. So that's where InterClips came from, interface and eclipse. All right, that is like the quick, less than 5-minute summary of who InterClips is. I'd love to entertain more questions later. My background personally, I have a computer science degree. I have worked in that integration world. The integration world I would describe as between the software developers and the systems administrators. One is always pointing fingers at the other. The developers are saying that my code doesn't work because of the system, and the system administrators are saying my systems don't work because of the developers and what they've deployed. So I end up working in that world, working on performance, troubleshooting, and trying to solve those problems for the customers. Just a couple headlines that I want to point out as we think about the insider threat. Which one do I have here first? NSA cases highlights growing concerns over insider threats. You guys remember Snowden? There's one other, Manning. Similar type issue. They took advantage of their access. They took advantage of a lack of policy. They took advantage of a lack of people looking over them to take information and to do something else with it. Now, some of it was for financial gain, some of it was for political gain, some of it was just because they disagreed with the way things were being done, what kind of information was being collected, how it was being collected. Another one here at the bottom I found interesting, and this brings it home to us as well, right? Why do we need to concern ourselves with the insider threat? This case here, I believe, is right on point. So a tech giant employee is arrested after he tried to sell secret codes tracking the locations of DEA agents to a Mexican drug cartel because he didn't get a raise. Right? Not paying attention to our employees, not making sure that we're taking care of their personal lives, not making sure that we're working with them so that they can focus on what they need to do. And not only that, the interesting thing, and I'll talk about this a little bit later about this particular story, is the company that had this issue, right? They had policy in place, they had training, they had awareness in place. So the reason he got caught is because another employee saw something that wasn't right. And they reported it, and they began to investigate it, and he ended up getting caught by a DEA agent posing as a Mexican drug cartel to take the sale. So it's an example of the threat of the insider, but also an example of how policy and procedure and training can take great advantage of it. Yes, ma'am?
Is there any research that shows how the bad apples, the damage versus that, versus, for lack of a better word, the sloppy apples, who are always like leaving their laptops on
Yes.
computers and things like that?
So
Which is a bigger problem.
in 2018 Insider Threat Report, if you Google that, you'll find the report. It's a set of slides, has a lot of those statistics on it. And the interesting thing is that the statistic they came up with was 47% of the insider threats were malicious, but 51% of them, it actually might even be higher, yes. It was 47 to 51 is the statistic I've seen. It varies depending on what report you look at, but there's a higher percentage of the incidental, somebody not doing something on purpose, the accidents, the uninformed. So yes, that's a great report. That's a great question to ask. It's, I didn't lock my screen. I'm using the simple passwords. I'm sharing my password with somebody else, or I just don't care, right? So I leave something out on my desk. 2018, this is actually the report, 2018 Insider Threat Report. 90% of organizations feel vulnerable to insider attacks. That's good, right? People realize it's an issue. They realize that something's there that they have to take advantage of. So as we go through this particular presentation, my goal is not to dig into the how do you solve it. I'll give you some solutions. I'll talk about some of the technologies. But my goal is to say it's a real issue. It's something that we have to address, something that we have to take care of. And I would say even from the fact of treating a small business like a large business, right? Where do most of the insider threats happen? They happen at the small business level because you don't think you have to worry about it because you trust all your partners. Recently I had a friend of mine who started a biotech business. And there was some contention going on between the partners, so much so that 3 of the partners were worried about one of the partners and what he would do with the information that he had access to. Right, so starting early with the simple things allows you to protect yourself later. Many organizations say insider threats attack have become more frequent. They're beginning to see them. They're beginning to identify them. They're beginning to deal with them and attack them, and to make sure that they're putting the measures in place to take care of it. Another thing they pointed out, organizations are shifting their focus on detection of insider threats. That's where we get into the technology. What are we using to detect and alert us so that there might be something that's going on? Right now, we might say, hey, that's an invasion of my privacy. But I'm going to tell you, if you're an employee of my company, you're using my resources, it's our customers, it affects our livelihood, that's where your policy has to come into play. It's not an invasion of privacy if I'm monitoring what you're doing on my resources, on my time, from my company's perspective. The most popular technologies to deter are DLP, which would be data loss prevention, encryption, and identity management. I'd say the last one there is probably key. Identity management. Who did what when? Right? Who is this person? So you think of systems administrators, what is one of the biggest issues with access there? They get lazy. They log in as the administrator and they do all their work as the administrator. Now the problem is, all I have is a record that said they logged in. I have no idea who it was that did what when, especially if there's multiple administrators with access to the same accounts. A large majority of organizations already have or are building insider threat programs. Kind of, again, it goes back to that first point. People see it, they're aware of it, and they're beginning to deal with it. But again, a lot of people say, well, it's going to cost me money. So I would say this, it's going to cost you money, but how much is it going to cost you if you lose your intellectual property? If you lose all of your business contacts? If you lose the personal identifiable information of your employees and it gets used to do something else? What's going to happen to your company? What is it worth? So these are not mine. I struggled long and hard to try to figure out how to present this. So I listened to a number of podcasts. The Insider Threat podcast, one of the things he deals with are the 4 pillars of insider threat protection. And I think as we walk through each of these pillars, technology, policy, training, and culture, it'll help us to identify issues, it'll help us to identify solutions, and open our eyes to remind us that it does exist. So technology, there's a number of tools out there, open source, commercial off-the-shelf products, people that have developed custom products. They're there, but what's the problem with technology? We don't use it. We don't use it right. We don't put it in place. We don't have the people to support it, so we say, well, we can't do that. Or we put it in place, we got the little checkbox solved, and now we don't actually look at the alerts and the logs. It becomes spam and noise to us, so we don't pay attention to it. Policy, buy-in, respect, implementation, and adherence at all levels. So what's one of the biggest problems with policy? A partner and owner saying, I don't have to do that because it's my company. So now what happens at the lower levels? They're like, well, the owner doesn't do it, so I don't have to deal with it either. Training. Training is probably one of the hardest things. It's got to be built into your policy. It's got to be repetitive. It's got to be something that people don't just pass off, right? But not just training of the once a year you've got to go through your security awareness training. The type of training that we're talking about is ongoing training. What are you doing on a daily basis to remind people of their responsibility, to help them be aware of the issues? You think back to that DEA, the DEA sale, the DEA issue, right? Training, culture. People were aware that there was something going on, so they reported it and action got taken. Or the administrator or the manager that gets the alert and says, that's not right. I trust this employee, but something's odd here. And then actually taking the steps to investigate it. Whether it takes time out of your day or not, just to protect. Maybe that individual's account got compromised and now something odd is happening. Or maybe that individual has just been upset for months and has been hiding it and no one knows what's going on and he's trying to take things and go somewhere else with it. And then culture. It all has to boil down to a culture change. We need to think about it on a daily basis, a moment by moment basis. We need to be aware of what's going on around us. Ernest was talking about just some personal issues. Think about social engineering. right? Think about an example that came up to me from a personal perspective and a mindset change of security in general. What do people do when they travel with their boarding passes? You'll see people take a picture of it and post it on Facebook and say, hey, look where I'm going. Well, the interesting thing is that little barcode, that little confirmation code allows anyone to go online to the airline's site and then pull up your information of your itinerary. So now what can they do that? What can they do with that? Now here's where it comes into our insider threat or a phishing scam. So right, I see that one of your employees is traveling. What do? I submit a phishing scam because I've got information about that employee, where they're traveling, and I might even be able to pull up their dietary restrictions. So now I can phrase an email that looks like it's coming from the airline, dealing with your dietary restrictions on your return flight, just to confirm it. But to confirm it, you need to click on this link. Now what just happened, right? It's an insider issue now, because now that particular user's account is potentially compromised. It's a culture, it's a mindset change across the board, not just while you're at work. So technology, right? Common technologies, logging and auditing, probably the key thing that you need to put in place. There's open source products out there. There's products that are commercial off the shelf. There's companies that'll do this for you. Relatively inexpensive. You get it in place, you start using it, and you actually have to pay attention to it. Keystroke and video monitoring. That might be where you say, wait a minute, you're invading my privacy. Right? This is my right. You can't look at what I have, but the fact is you're on a company resource, and if your policy's been defined correctly, then the employee already understands what's going to happen. They've agreed to it.
What's video monitoring?
Video monitoring, just screen capture, monitoring what's actually going on your screen. So in a situation where your keystroke logging and video, I mean, this is what the bad guys are going to do. Right? They're capturing what's coming through your video card. Now think about presentations. You can record a presentation live in a little snapshot video, and then you can post the video. Same type of technology. It can be utilized for good and for bad. Real-time incident awareness. What's going on right now? Who's logged into my system? What are they doing? What are they accessing? Right? What are people going after? They're going after your data. Are you monitoring who accessed what, when, what they take, what they do with it, what did they print? What's actually going on? Now, are you going to look at all this data all the time? No. But when you've got incident awareness, when you get into the bottom one, security, incident, and event management, an alert gets popped up that somebody did something odd off hours. This individual, let use an example, somebody prints something at 11 o'clock at night, and it's like 700 pages. But they're not typically in at 11 o'clock at night, and they often don't print. Right, so now you've got things that correlated together. An alert gets kicked off. You've got something you need to look into. But you've got to use the technology to make sure that you understand what's going on. Sandboxing is a great opportunity. Whether it's sandboxing from when you click on it and it's a Citrix type solution, whether it's sandboxing from a VDI perspective, where what's our biggest threat and why do I think sandboxing can have a huge advantage? BYOD, bring your own device. People bring their own devices into work. But if you want to access company resources, you've got to use the virtual desktop interface. Right now, the virtual desktop interface has no permissions for you to get data to your local device. So now you're protecting yourself a little bit more. Does it make our job a little bit more cumbersome? Yes. Can we learn how to work around it? Yes. But what do people say? It's inconvenient. I can't get it done quick enough. Right, so let's think about the typical sales rep. The typical sales rep's out in the field. I need to install this now, and I need full administrative rights to my workstation. Now, okay, that's a viable request, but what happens when they click on that phishing email? They have administrative rights, and now their system's been compromised, and all your customer data is gone. Right, so there's a lot of little nitnoids that we need to think about. Configuration management. When something does happen, how do I recover from it? Where is my data? What versions exist? Who accessed it? Is it off-site? System backups. Role-based access control. This is one of those things that everybody has to abide to. I've lived in the systems administration world for a long time, systems integration world, and you're doing a lot of things as the administrator, or from a Linux world as root. But all of your administrators all of those people who have privileged access should do the same things, the same steps, and not just become the administrative user to do their work. You can use something called sudo, or if you're in Windows, you right-click on Run as Administrator, and you can give them the permissions to do certain things at certain times, but when they're doing their normal work, they're just their normal user with less restrictions. Technology. Key takeaway from technology, got to use it. Got to implement it. Now, there's different levels and different expenses for everybody. Good comment here. Typical security programs focus on the perimeter defenses. They say, I'm protected by my firewall, nobody can get in. I'm not worried about it. Right? But what about the inside? And something I want you to think about this. Yeah, you're protected from the outside. Is somebody going to get through your firewall and your perimeter? Yes. It's going to happen one day. If there's something they want, they're going to get it. Now, I want you to think about it from this perspective. When the outsider, Ernest alluded to this a little bit, we're not talking about that a whole lot, penetrates your firewall. Now they're inside your system. That individual's an insider threat. Because now they have to adhere to all the policies, all of the restrictions, all of the access controls that you've put on the inside of your system. Right? Just like a typical user. So if someone does get through, do you want them to have administrative rights? No, you want them to be a standard user. So now your logging and alerting will kick off something that's odd, and you can react to it before they've done something even deeper. Organizations often underestimate insider threats and the damage they can do. Right? It's real, it happens, and a lot of data gets lost. And a lot of companies fold up because of it. And I already mentioned this, right? The cloud and BYOD. Right? You can bring your own device to work. You can bring your phone, you can bring your tablet, you can bring your laptop. Right? What's keeping people from putting things on those devices, taking them away, and I have no idea what they're doing with it. But that's where the sandboxing can help us. So I was just looking to see. I'll skip some of those comments. Policy. Another one, right? Used to communicate acceptable user data and system access or system restrictions. What can you do? When can you do it? How can you do it? Right? But it's got to be there. So the difficult part about policy, if you don't have policy in place and something does happen, what can an employee say? You never told me I couldn't do that. So now you're stuck in that legal issue. Right? Were you logging and auditing correctly? Yeah, sure. Did you tell them they couldn't do it? Did you put the restrictions in place? You're going to have a really difficult issue with that particular situation. Sorry about that. Right? Bridges the gaps between technical controls and solutions. Here's our technology. Here's why it's here. And here's how we're going to use it. Here's how we're going to apply it. Here are the things that you have to do as an employee. As you build your policies, focus on defining the threat. What is the threat? What are we trying to protect ourselves against? Right? Include the fact that you're trying to protect their livelihood. Right? Protect their employee or protect their job, but also protect our customers. Now, we do a lot of work with the federal government. We have situations where we have information about people's security clearances. We have information, just like every other company, about the employee themselves, social security numbers, personal identifiable information. If that information is lost, it's really difficult. Now me, bridging the gap between technology, being a technologist, and doing business development, one of the things that we've done in our company is incorporated segmentation. There are actually aspects of the sales process, there are aspects of the billing process that I don't have access to, and that's a good thing. Right? I don't get to see what every employee makes. I don't get to see what rates we use on all of our contracts. That's segregated, and that's for the individuals that need to know it, but it's not information that I can just go out, grab, and go do something with. So defining the rules and policies. Why are you doing it? How are you doing it? What are you doing? How do you get users to accept it? Right? When an employee comes on board, how many of you have an indoctrination where they come in and they say, look, here's our policies, here's what we believe, Here's what we're protecting it. Here's why we're protecting it. And oh, by the way, here's your responsibility. And then having them sign something to say that they accept it. And then doing that on a reoccurring basis. But the thing about policy is it doesn't just start once. Policy is something that molds itself and shapes itself over time. Now again, getting back to policy, almost comply. I think probably one of the biggest issues with policy is upper management saying, I don't have to worry about it. It's not my job. Right? That doesn't apply to me. So again, as I had mentioned earlier, then it kind of propagates down to the people that are underneath them, and then they don't worry about it. They're not concerned about it.
Yes, you've also raised a really, really interesting issue for me, because I've got a client that is pharmaceutical, very, very conscientious. I mean, they do not let me do a survey monkey with them through the firewall, because that's like too dangerous.
Mhm.
However, their lawyer hired Michael Cohen for 1.2 million or something to get insights on the Trump administration, which has been major news. So that this is like an inside, and employees are furious and really upset, which is kind of interesting now, because I mean this is such a stupid boneheaded move by the lawyer. But I mean, they could easily now have risk in terms of employees just get really lax because they're really upset with senior leadership for doing something really stupid.
And that's a hard thing. From a senior leadership perspective, especially as your company grows, how engaged are you with your employees? Or are you completely disconnected? Like over here, you don't engage with your employees, you don't get a feel on it. An example I like to use, I don't know people's background, but if you think from an Old Testament perspective, you had Moses. He's in the desert with thousands and thousands of people, and he's trying to solve and deal with everyone's problems. He's the single point of contact for all judgment, for all cases, for all issues. And his wise father-in-law, Jethro, comes to him and says, wait a minute, you can't do this by yourself. You've got to break it down. You've got to put people over tens and hundreds and thousands. And what was the purpose there was that you have a little group. They deal with their issues. They rectify it. If they can't deal with it, they take it up a level, kind of like our legal system works. So that one person's not dealing with all the issues. But you think about the insider threat issue, it has to happen the same way. And all those groups need to interact so that when it does get up to the top, the individual at the top kind of has a feel and a pulse on the people that are below them so that they can make sure that they can address and deal with those issues. Now, at the top, are you going to make wrong decisions? Sure. But how do you address it with the people below you? Because once somebody becomes disgruntled, it's very difficult to bring them back out of it. But even that, if you've got a group of people disgruntled, it's even worse, right? It's not just one person kind of mumbling and groaning. You have all of them kind of working on themselves. And eventually that's going to cause that insider threat by that one person that's going to go do something that they shouldn't do. Take some information, leak some information to the media.
Because someone above him did something he shouldn't do, right? Basically, right?
Yeah.
So, and then they're asking you to sign this policy,
And you're
an
like,
employee, and then
yeah.
they do that. So,
Yes.
yeah, I see both sides there. But quit the job, I think I would do.
I think in the end, as you go through this, one of the things that I'm seeing, especially in the 2018 Insider Threat Report, is that people are beginning to realize it. Companies are beginning to realize it sooner, and they're beginning to put things in place a lot sooner and a lot more efficient to make sure that they deal with the issue. Here's a simple example. So you think about an insider threat as just your employees. Right, so here it's titled Privacy Snafu. Thousands of military vets details exposed in S3 privacy snafu. Now, it's interesting because this isn't what we would think of as an insider threat, but it was an insider threat by proxy because it was a third-party service provided by another vendor. It was not AWS's fault. It was another contractor who had created this S3 bucket basically to share data. The data was a database full of military vets' information, where they were deployed, what they did, but not only that, it had resumes of people that corroborated in foreign countries to help with various situations. It was exposed, it was out on the public internet. Now, why is that an insider threat? Because you brought those people into your company to do some work for you. They now had access to data, to people, and to resources that are within your company. Right? So the insider threat could be a temporary employee, it could be an intern. It could be a contractor that you bring in to do some work with you. But you have to treat them all the same. They're on the inside of your system. They're just like your employees. Now, if it's a contractor or a third party, it should actually be more restrictive than your general employee. But it demonstrates the importance to vet and audit at all levels, not just internal to your company, but what services are we using? When I reach out to another company that provides some service in the cloud, did I vet their product to make sure that it's got all of the proper security controls in place? Do we have the right agreements and policy of use in place so that we're protecting ourselves in the event that they have an issue or that they leak our data by accident? Just treat them just like normal users. Training. What are some easy benefits? Increases the understanding of acceptable behavior. What can an employee do? What can't an employee do? Right? Those are a lot of questions that we need to ask ourselves, that we need to focus on, but we often don't. 5 key elements. Oh, good, I have them up here. 5 key elements of training. Purpose. What are you protecting? Right? What's the one thing that we all hate about training? Why am I doing this training? I don't know how many of you have had experience within the federal government, within classified spaces, but you have to go through an amazing amount of training on a regular basis. And you do hear that question, why do I have to go through this? Well, you've got to bring it into their perspective. You've got to bring in what you're protecting, why you're protecting it, and kind of frame out the picture for them so that they understand it and they don't mind going through the same training every year. Now, when I get it, some of the training I had to do was very legal. It's almost like reading legalese. But not only that, I had to read it, I had to digest it, and I had to take a test on it to make sure that I digested the key important items of it, so that I understood what was going on. Rules. Rules should be detailed and in line with your policies. So you're laying out the whys, the hows, and the whats based on the policy that you put in place and based on the policy that they signed. You're reminding them what they signed. You're asking them to go through that security refresher once a year and then sign and acknowledge that they did it. Now you might say, well, training is such a pain. How do I get people to do it on a regular basis? I talked to a security officer not long ago, and he would embed a password somewhere in the presentation. Now you say, well, why is he giving a password away? Well, the password was a password they needed to go take the test. But the cool thing is, they had to go through the training to find the password so that they could actually go take the test and get their credentials. Now, what did that do? It forced them to go through the training. It forced them to actually go through slide by slide. Descriptions of the threat. What are we protecting ourselves against? What is the biggest issue? If somebody inside our company did something malicious or negligent, what's the effect? Right? What's the effect to the employee, to the individuals, to the company as a whole, so that they understand it? Right? That they're trying to team with you to defend against it. And then examples of the threat. I think examples of the threat, the best thing we can do there is identify the key systems within our business. Right? Some of the things we're not going to identify all the details to because we don't want to give people information to go do something. But what are the key things inside our system that we have to protect? Right? What is our IP, our intellectual property? What is our customer database? What personal information are we trying to protect against? And then responding to incidents. Right? How do you respond to an incident? How do you do something anonymously? You don't want to feel like a rat. Right? A lot of people won't say anything because they feel like they're ratting on someone. And that's probably something that's beat into our heads as children because we want to go tattle on our brother or our sister or our friend, and we get it beat in our head that tattling's wrong. Well, in a situation like this, I always remind my kids, same thing we can remind our employees, are they going to hurt themselves Are they going to hurt someone else? If you're going to answer one of those two questions, then the answer is yes, you need to go tell. Right? If they're going to hurt the business that you're working for and the livelihoods of all the people that are working for you, then yeah, you need to go report it. But what mechanisms are put in place to help them feel protected, that they're not going to get ratted out, that they're not going to have more difficulties with their jobs? Things along those lines. Training. Probably one of the most difficult issues to happen. Most data breaches are accidental by an obvious or careless user. Back to your question not too long ago. It's somebody who's not really paying attention to what they're doing. I like to use an example here from a project that I was on, a rather large project. At one point in time, we had the ability to manage the storage, the network, the security, the operating systems, and the application. So we had full control of the entire system. And as time went on, the customer began to break out the responsibilities. Now, as they broke out the responsibilities, the network guys took care of the network, the storage guys took care of the storage, security got broken out. Now, what happened? Right? People began to treat it like a 9-to-5 job. It's in a mission environment. Now, let's take it out, not in a mission environment, but they treated it like a 9-to-5 job. We've got a development system, a test system, and an integration system to make sure the product can get out the door. A product that's going to make your company money. Now the network guy says, I've got 15 minutes, I need to get this done or my boss is going to be on my tail tomorrow morning. Makes a quick change, everything looks like it's right, they take off. Takes the entire system down. Now you say, well, that's not that big of a deal if it's a small company, just a handful of people. Well, here's something from an insider threat perspective we might not think about. Now, I've got 250 people sitting on their backsides who can't do anything. And they're billing time. So think about the money that's being wasted because of one careless move. Now, I've seen it happen on the network side. I've seen it happen on the storage side. As a systems administrator, I've seen people hit delete in the wrong spot. Now it goes back to configuration management, right? Are you backing up your configurations? Can you restore your system? Can you restore your data? Right? It happens because people are in a rush. Right? What have I done? Lessons learned by mistakes I've made in the past. You're getting ready to come up on vacation. What do? Stop making changes about 3 days out from vacation, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to rush. Next thing you're going to know, you're going to make a mistake, and now you got a big, huge, major problem that you have to deal with. Something else out of training you can take is treat a small business like a large business. Right? Put things in place now that you need in place later. Put your policies in place. Put your training in place. You know, maybe it's kind of rudimentary. Maybe the slides aren't that great. Maybe the content's not quite there, right? Maybe it's not some flashy flash presentation that everyone loves to watch, or some like neat little video game to teach you the policies, right? But put things in place now so that as you grow, it's already there and you're not rushing to do it at the last minute. That's usually what happens. Or why do we put the technology in place? We often put the technology in place because something bad just happened. Right? Because we just lost something. Some critical system was destroyed. Somebody stole a database of all of our customers' information. And now we react and we want to put all the technology in place. And then we overreact. The pendulum goes to the far other extreme, and now our other employees start getting disgruntled with us because we just locked everything down so tight that they don't know what to do. Right? If it's in there from the beginning, they learn how to work around it. If the culture's there, they enjoy working for the customer, they don't mind taking the extra steps. I always like to remind people, when you have those extra steps in place, you're still getting paid. You have to account for it in your timelines. You have to take the time, make it a cultural change, make it a mindset change so that people are thinking about things correctly. Top 5 signs. Businesses must remain vigilant to prevent data breaches from occurring within their own organization. You have to take steps, and you need to take them sooner rather than later. Great article to look up. Top 5 signs that your employees are engaging in risky behavior. I just grabbed a couple of them here. I don't have them up here. One of the things, somebody's always covering their tracks. You never quite know what they're doing. right? They're kind of sneaking around. They're always making excuses for something that's going on. Personal email. They use personal email a lot. You see a lot of bigger companies and vendors locking out the ability to get the personal email when you're at work, right? Because you can use personal email to do a lot of things, to take a lot of things, and to work things behind the scenes. Now, two types of employees. You've got leavers, people who are on their way out the door. What's the issue about a leaver? It can take you a month to 3 months to realize anything that they did. And it usually happens after. Because what didn't we do? We didn't follow our policy that says this person is leaving, and we didn't lock their accounts down. We didn't remove their accesses. It was just left in place because we didn't have time or we forgot about it. And then the other one is you've got joiners. You don't really know the person that just came into your company. So what are you putting in place to make sure that they're adopting your culture, that they understand who you are, what your business is? You don't really know what their background is, what their personal life issues are, right? So you've got two different types of peoples. They're on their way out. That's a worry, right? If they're on their way in, we usually don't pay attention to those folks. But I think in the end, joiners or leavers, we need to treat everybody the same. We need to put everybody under the same restrictions and the same policies. Now, another one, right? Inappropriate internet usage. We're always going to find that. We're always going to run into that issue. So what are they doing on the internet? Maybe it's something that's explicit. Maybe it's not something that's explicit. Maybe it's one of these fun little share things where you can share music and you can share video, or it's too much social media. Or you're going to run the risk of somebody clicking on something that they're not supposed to do. So what are you putting in place to protect yourself against that? I did put it up here. A great set of resources. National Insider Threat Task Force in the U.S. A lot of information out there. There's presentations, there's training, there's resources out there that will give you more information than you need to get things started. Now again, as we think about the insider threat, we're not trying to make people's job more difficult. We're trying to protect their job and their livelihoods. Quote, culture, I love this quote. Culture is simply a shared way of doing something with a passion. Right? So how do we push that out to the people that we're trying to employ, the people that we're trying to work with, to make it a passion, to make them protect their livelihoods? It's kind of a culmination of the three pillars, right? We use technology investments. We have to use the technology. It uses policy to inform, and it uses training to communicate the growing passion. Time for a change, another great quote. I love quotes. Employees should feel comfortable and obligated to report suspected insider threats. I think the key there is comfortable. Right? They should feel comfortable to report it, that they don't feel like the rat, that they're protecting themselves and they're protecting the people that are around them. Now, culture is changing. People are becoming more and more aware of what's going on around them. They're becoming more and more aware of what's going on in their workplace, what's going on when they sit down in the Starbucks. You think of an insider threat issue going to Starbucks or going to Panera or just hopping on some random free network. There's an advantage of having your own little hotspots, right? Because you don't really know that that's actually Starbucks network. It's not somebody else putting something out there to get data from you. Four pillars: technology, policy, training, and culture. They all work together really well. They all identify different problems. Again, the Insider Threat podcast, he goes into these in a little bit more detail and gives a lot of some of the examples that I pulled out of here and many more examples he talks about there. I love that podcast. Another good article: is your organization at risk from insider threats? The reality is yes. That's a great quote there as well. And then another insider threat there: negligence in many forms. It's a cultural problem, right? I'm on my way out the door to go home for vacation. That's when things are going to happen, when you're rushing. Or I really need to get this done because my boss is putting pressure on me, and I really don't want my boss to be angry. I don't like dealing with my boss when he's angry. So instead of going to talk to him about the issues that you've uncovered, You just do something quick, and now you potentially cause a larger issue. The insider threat, the malicious, is a little harder to detect. That's where we're going to put our technology in place. The key things are going to pop up and let us know what's going on, when it's going on. Oh, good. I have a few things here. So, insider threat, many different forms. The employee who never bothers to read corporate security policies, right? It becomes spam to them. Or the manager that doesn't read the alerts because they get too many of them because you haven't tuned the system correctly. You've got the employee who has their corporate laptop stolen but doesn't report it because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble. And now their corporate laptop had tons of information on it. The employee who uses the same short passwords for their business accounts and for their personal email accounts. Another simple threat. The employee who frequently leaves their laptop logged in and unattended. I love this one. So we used to do this in classified environments. If somebody would leave themselves logged in and walk away, we would mess with their desktop. Icons really big, we'd flip it upside down, we'd screen lock it so that it looked like it was open. We'd do all kind of fun things, and then they would have to undo it, and it would take them a little while, and it was a good reminder not to do it again. But the employee who talks about confidential business information in public settings. Right? We don't think about that a lot, but what happens when people start to drink and they start to express themselves because they're aggravated and frustrated? Now all of a sudden they're revealing information that they shouldn't reveal about your company, or more importantly about your customer. Right? So now you're losing your customer's trust. Now the malicious threat is the individual who steals intellectual property little by little and then goes and takes it and sells it to the company that they want to go work for. Or they get a big bonus because they move over there. The individual who leaks confidential customer information. Especially if you're working for the government, if you're working in the medical industry, there is information that there is no reason for you to talk about outside of your customers' interactions. The individual who commits fraud for personal gain. Right? They just want to get a little bit more money. The individual who steals their business laptop when leaving the company. Oh, I lost it. I don't know where it went. Well, they really kept it because they want to take all their sales contacts and then go pursue additional information. Some insider threats that I've seen personally. We thought individuals were doing work when they actually weren't. They made it seem like they were doing work. They were negligent on following up with contract negotiations and things along those lines. Now we've got problems that all of a sudden just ensued because we assumed they were doing their job, but we didn't have the protections in place to make sure that they were actually doing it. I love this. I love this movie. Outsider threat becoming the insider threat. When you think about Meet the Falkers, right? His circle of trust, always watching everyone, and that should include yourself, right? Because every one of us is going to be prone to doing something silly at some point in time, right? So is our laptop, is our system that we're using as a manager or a higher level under the same scrutiny that the employees are? Are our notifications being sent and monitored at the same place? Often you feel like you're outside the circle of trust, so think about the culture, think about the training. How do we allow people to feel like they're inside the circle of trust along with us so that we cannot feel like we're pushing somebody out? But I think this is something we need to really think about, and that's the outsider threat becoming the insider. Right? So we often don't think about protecting our inside. We're worried about protecting our border, but once you get in, they have free reign to do whatever they want. Think about the small businesses. Everything's on a common drive share that's not password protected so that when everybody's in there, they can all get to it because their laptops weren't working together really well. And then the social engineering threat is a big one. It's not hard to convince somebody to give them your password. If you do, there's another podcast out there called the Social Engineering Podcast that I enjoy listening to. A lot of psychology that goes behind it, but you believe it or not, it's not as tricky as you think it would be because people are really naive. Tech support called them and said, I need your password to solve this problem for you on your computer. Right? Now, what have they done? They've done a little research to know that your computer's running this operating system. It's out of date. It needs this patch. So they've got all these truth items that they've patched together, so now it sounds like it's true, and people fall for it all the time. Or the survey that comes out from somebody you're doing business with, but it's not really that person. You click on the survey, you take the survey, looks like you're taking a survey, but something else is happening behind the scenes. They're collecting information on it.
So on that, one of the companies I used to work for, our two IT guys, where you talk about training being really tough to do, they actually, when they did the security training, they put a skit together to do the social engineering threat. So they basically, I think they actually got it from some other company, but they showed like, hey, I'm calling the help desk at so-and-so and asking questions, and basically showed how someone could go in and get your password and take over your account and that kind of stuff. But they made it fun.
Yeah.
And actually the employees got more out of that. You know, seeing these two guys up there really kind of making fools of themselves, you know, in a way. But you can kind of do things like that to help the training and get your point across.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point.
You know, Rick, I was just thinking, there's two things that kind of come to mind, that, if somebody wakes up and decides they want to be sort of malicious, if you will, for lack of, there's ways to kind of, that's the sad reality, basically. I tell people, I said about these incidents with bombs or running over people on sidewalks and that kind of thing. You just wake up and decide that's what you want to do. But one thing that I was just thinking about basically is now, as a lot of companies are moving to hosted apps. I mean, the reality is they've got all their data. And can't that become, sort of a threat to the company from a business viability standpoint if they start compromising your data and you don't know that?
So
that I mean, when you talk about the outside of it becoming the inside, but the reality is that, the reason I say that basically is I just had an incident basically where I'm negotiating. I mean, this is actually interesting. So I'm negotiating with Cisco, who bought Meraki on our annual license fees, and so this is in San Francisco, and the guy's like, "Don't worry about it." Basically, just next thing is they shut down our network. So 24 businesses have got no access to the internet. And they shut down the appliance. And, it was restored in a half a day, but half a day, when you talk about 20 businesses, entirely reliant on the internet, right? That was one thing, and basically it caused me to basically move away from Cisco. I'll never allow basically a third party to basically shut down my appliance remotely. So I shut that down. Ironically, basically, there were 2 access points that we'd shut down. Because it couldn't renew that license, it shuts down the appliance again, after we basically terminated the agreement. So, I mean, that is a huge threat. And I told the guys, I said, in all my time, I've been doing this 20 years, I never thought that Cisco, a publicly traded company, would basically kill my credibility in an hour. And I said, I will make damn sure that didn't happen by basically moving. And as we're negotiating to put 50 new devices in the new building, I mean, they just lost that contract just immediately, basically, that happened. So, I mean, I'm super sensitive to it. And on the flip side, basically, I've got a license with Bluffton. And I just called and I told them, I said, deactivate the whole license because, the renewal hadn't been paid. And I've had contact with the principal twice. So they don't have access to any of that data. I've got access to all the data. That is a threat. I mean, because essentially I'm going to move it from one entity to an entity who I'm doing business with unilaterally. Unilaterally. I mean, I'm going to basically compromise 80 points of data and give it to. So I mean, I'm on both sides of this outside of becoming the inside. I mean, that's and a lot of people are moving to hosted apps.
Well, I think it's a good point when you talk about hosted apps. I was just talking to a software engineer not long ago, and one of the points that he brought out was the element of trust we have of our underlying systems. And that's really true for hosted apps, right? You have trust that when you host things with Microsoft Azure or with Google's cloud service or with AWS, that their underlying system is secure. And you assume it's secure, you trust it, and you don't worry about it anymore. But if they're compromised, then there's another level of compromising there. It's not really the outsider threat, because at that point in time, you've embraced that technology as yours,
Sure.
right? So it's an insider threat, but there's an element of trust that you have to have under the covers that's very difficult for you to determine sometimes, and that's your risk base, right? You've got to, is this risk worth it to my business as I do these things? If I'm storing something in a public place, that I put the proper encryption in place to make sure that if someone does get the file, that it's a little bit more difficult for them to get access to.
I would also add too, like I'm involved in a migration right now. Some of those hosted apps make convoluted processes to lock things down, so the average end user can't, get that level of security that they need, or they've left the system exposed. For instance, with Google, I have a lot of healthcare clients. To get the BAA downloaded and forwarded, you have to go through all these hoops to get that document to finally come out of the product. And the average user doesn't know how to do that. You know what I mean? And they're just trusting that when they sign up for Google Business that, oh, we're HIPAA compliant. You got 6 check boxes and all these other types of steps to do those types of things.
And that's the interesting thing. Like AWS provides that underlying security layer, but you have to provide the security of your application, the security of the services that you're hosting there. That's your responsibility, not Amazon's.
That's right.
Right. So that's one of those very difficult issues, and that's where you have to bring people in, and that's where the level of technologists that you need inside your company now just increases. Right. You can't just take the guy that learned how to use Microsoft Windows at home to become your systems administrator inside the business anymore. You've got to have somebody that's got a good underlying base knowledge of all the different types of systems and the technology that's there. Well, we're out of time. Let's wrap this up. But another good article, 10 tips for reducing insider threats. Let me just walk through some things of kind of what to do next. That's a great article to read. Some of the things they point out: establish a security and incident response team. We've already talked about that. How do you act? How do you identify? And how do you respond to it? Type situation. Making security a part of your culture. It's got to be embedded into your employees from the beginning. They have to understand what they're protecting and why they're protecting it. Perform ongoing risk management. The services that we're talking about, the services that we use that are outside our company. Office 365. Is it worth the risk for us to keep our intellectual property in some of those locations, or do we want to put a system internal that we have greater protection and greater control over? Using appropriate security software to track and analyze behavior. Right? What are my users doing, including me, on a regular basis? How can I ensure that the data that's stored is confidential, that the integrity is maintained, the confidentiality is maintained, and it's protected? It can't be modified. Right? We don't want to be able to pull that up for a legal issue, and then all of a sudden someone say, well, that was on a system that everyone had access to. Anybody could have modified that data. Right? So it's not worthy to be able to prove your case. Some things that we've already talked about: using temporary accounts, conducting frequent audits. We've already talked about that. What's not being used anymore? Right? What system accounts don't have to be active, that have default passwords that everyone knows what they are? Identifying unhappy employees and deal with them. We had a situation not too long ago, and this was actually an unhappy employee of one of our prime contractors. We realized they were on their way out the door. They wanted to go work for another company because they were having some issues. So our CTO stepped in, talked to the employee, and then took that employee and went and talked to their management. They resolved the issue. The employee is still working for the company today. Right? So not only do we need to trust our employees to identify those issues, do we need to deal with them, but potentially the contractors, the subcontractors that we have underneath us, helping us to control our businesses. Using two-factor authentication, big thing there, identity management, who's doing what when. Consider third-party products. We've already talked about that. Encryption's an interesting thing. So 60% of companies are using data loss protection. And the other thing is, not that many less are actually encrypting their data. Right? Encrypting their data in transit. A term that I've run across recently is ubiquitous encryption. Everything's encrypted. Right? There's technologies out there that will enable you to do that, and do that in an amazing way, but you've got to put it in place. you've got to use it, right? But you don't want to hinder the ability to actually do work so much so you've got to find your balance of risk. Some products that you might want to invest into. Splunk is a good one, but it's expensive, right? You can do some things with the SIEM, Alien Vault's there's an open source product out there that will do security incident and event management for you. You've got Graylog that's going to collect your log data, give you the ability to correlate it, push it into the SIEM system. Now you can get alerted and you know what's going on. You just have to get somebody to implement it. There's great open source products out there. There's great commercial off-the-shelf products out there. It's all going to boil down to money, but not only money, but also the type of people that you have to manage what's there. And then behavior analytics, that's one of those things that everybody kind of shies away from because people feel like their privacy is getting invaded, right? What did I do when I was on my corporate laptop? Where did I go? What did I access? Who am I talking to? What personal email did I reach out to? Those type of things. And now you just need to basically improve your ability with the technology, with the training, with the policy, and the culture to be able to defend against the insider threat. And to be honest with you, if you're defending against the insider threat, ultimately you're going to defend against the outsider threat as well, because the outsider is trying to attack people inside your company to get inside your borders to do things. Just some different reasons. Hacktivism, I'm hacking because I don't like you. I'm hacking because I want to prove a point. They're not really looking to get any money out of it. They're just trying to hack to prove a point. Financial gain, right? The employee who didn't get a raise and wants a little bit more money, but they see something that they can sell. Maybe it's a product, maybe it's a customer list, who knows what it is. The insider threat, the person who's just aggravated with you, right? You could put them in the hacktivism area. They just have more access to your system and they want to take your company down. Espionage and terrorism, we know those. We hear a lot of stories about those. Insider threats are not much more different than our cyber criminals. They're trying to do the same things, probably for slightly different reasons and slightly different purposes, but we need to put the same protections in place. Now, real quick thing here, what functionality, security, and usability? It's a balance issue, right? You can secure things so much so that you can't do any work. Like what is the most secure computer that you can have? Powered off, disconnected, in a locked room, right? But you can't do any work on it, right? So we have to accept an element of risk to be able to do the work that we do. We have to accept an element of trust with the people that we work with so that we can actually get the work done, so that we can satisfy our customers' needs. Anyway, that's the end of that. So my goal, I hope I accomplished it, was to show you that the insider threat's real. A lot of the information that you saw, a lot of the points, a lot of the examples, especially the 4 pillars, I didn't invent. That's a great thing because I'm trying to show you that there's plenty of resources out there for you to gather the information as well. A lot of people think it's a complex issue to deal with, complex issue to identify, but there's so much information out there. Now, do you need the right person to dissect it all, to figure out what the best process is to do? Yes, there's a number of good companies out there that can help you with it if you don't have that internal staff. But I would look for a company who is not only going to help you, but help your internal staff to be able to manage it once they go away, because those people aren't going to be around forever.
Any questions for Rick?
Any other questions?
Yeah, who monitors it? You gotta pay someone to monitor these alarms, you know, you've got false alarms and all that kind of stuff. Who pays for that?
Company would pay for it.
You're gonna have to, right?
Yeah,
So
they're-
how many, you get 10 employees before you get one of those, 100 employees? I mean,
That's an element of risk. You can monitor it internally yourself, right? So think about accountability. What's the best accountability? You've got at least 2 people to keep each other accountable, maybe 3, even from different backgrounds. Maybe it's your systems administrator who's a junior SA, your CTO of your company, and one of your center level managements, right? They're getting the alerts that are notifying that, hey, something's not right. And then that group keeps everybody accountable to make sure that you respond to those incidents. You know, the next step is going to services, going to companies that will actually provide you that monitoring service. Now, when is that threshold, that line?
That's my question.
Yeah, that's a financial issue that's going to have to be made. That's a policy issue, right? You're shipping your logs and all your data off to some third-party service. Not a bad thing, because now you've just potentially increased the integrity and confidentiality, because now it's off-site. It's no longer on your system anymore. But cost is probably going to be the biggest factor there.
I think, you know, all my time in the city, what I found, James, is that it's not a glamorous, sexy thing. I mean, you know, you kind of see the threats, and it tends to get pushed down the ladder in terms of priorities and that kind of thing. You know.
Yeah.
But I think it's making that kind of commitment.
Yeah. I mean, in 1995, 1996, I implemented a lot of like lesser, more advanced versions of these technologies to do a number of things, and we were dealing with pagers, right? We were having events sent to us on a pager to say that, hey, something's not right, we need to look at it, or we were dealing with email. But the great thing today, right, apps, smartphones, you can actually pull it up and it can show you, you know, the events, they're correlated statistically, which ones are more important that you need to pay attention to. So there's technology out there to make it a lot easier for smaller companies to do things sooner and actually pay attention to it and respond to it.
If I could add,
Yeah.
educating the end user usually is another area, I would say, on top of the financial. Many of the tools and applications we use today do have reporting in them, but again, most people don't have that knowledge on how to set it up, how to prune it, how to, you know, go through those types of things. And so the average small business is going, okay, how do I get this, right? And then they want to give it out to somebody else when it's already part of that, and now there's another added cost when it's already a feature you already have access to.
You know, the other thing about stuff like this is,
Right?
the person who's, it's critical, you know, for being that guy, basically, it's critical that the companies that are coming in speak English.
Yeah.
You know, it's amazing to me the number of guys who are very technically savvy, and you're losing the guys. The guys are kind of nodding, they're really glazed over in their brain, their eyes are, and they act like they know, you know, but the reality is that the real business opportunity, you know, is to basically being able to translate it into a language. You know, I mean, I've got Joe Bryan, basically, he's translated with me and the technical guys. I mean, I told him, I said, we're bringing somebody to talk about cryptocurrency, basically, you know, there's a company in the building next door on charity. And so Joe, basically, we just walking my dog, and he's kind of walking with me, and he just said, I think it's perfect for charity. And I'm like, well, why? And he says, because pledges can never be identified. So basically, crypto is perfect for that, because you can identify and have a track record of the pledges, and you can keep, you know. So I'm thinking to myself, could you come into this interview, because I know, you know, basically Clay's not going to be talking English, and the reporter doesn't know it, or me, basically, who acts like pretends like I know, which I don't know anything. So I'm like, this would be really helpful, right? Three of us, and I'm just sitting over there. I like,
Nodding and
you know,
smiling.
it's a great example of basically when the cloud came about. I called basically 8 of my friends, and I said, talk to me about the cloud. And basically, not one of, I mean, they all left me, you know, I mean, after 8 guys, I could never figure it out. Basically, and it took me about 3 months to figure out what the cloud is, which is like remote data servers scattered all over the world. But nobody could just tell me that in English. I'm like, guys, you know, so this is a similar situation. This issue of security is, it can truly compromise your business viability.
Right.
Just think about that. If you think of everything as a business, the one thing people get is basically compromise your business viability. What if you went away because it's compromised? Then, to your point on the slides, you know, no paycheck anymore, no this, no that kind of thing.
And I think to put that in perspective, the whole field of crisis management, of which this is an important part, hasn't really been around there all that long. And if you like quotes, there's a guy by the name of Ian Mitroff who has this great thing about how you need to think like a sociopath, to think about all these things, and act like a saint.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good one.
Isn't that great?
That's absolutely.
Well, and it's very true for the technology world. You have to, from a threat perspective, you've got to think like the adversary, so that you can defend against the adversary, because they're going to do things that you would never expect. You got to dig yourself into the mind of the disgruntled employee to think what they might do based on what they have access to, so that you can put protections in place. And I think a lot of it boils down to training, to a cultural change, to accountability. right? You know, if I had to put one thing in place outside of the technology, it would be some level of accountability between people in the organization. Not just all those people in charge, but bring somebody that's outside of that loop into that accountability structure so that you can make sure that you're keeping yourselves in check.
I think Andre brings a good point though too, with regards to the industry can do something about that as well. So for instance, my business, and I'm not promoting myself, my tagline is demystifying technology for growing businesses, right? If the industry started doing that instead of keeping that high level stuff up there, people wouldn't feel so, oh, I can't touch this, I don't know how to do that, right? Because things are becoming a lot easier now. You don't need to have those skill sets because a lot of that stuff's being built into the applications and things.
Well, but
Right.
you know, the beauty of that is it creates the business opportunity. I know people that said, you know,
But the sad thing is that it does create the opportunity too, right?
Well,
Because
it-
people are not serving people.
yeah, I mean,
right?
I just, you know, I mean, I'm just thinking about, since the whole incident with Cisco,
Right.
and
Oh,
I
yeah.
move and go
Scarred
from,
for life.
you know, good from 5,000 to 80,000 square feet, right, and our brand, and I just said, you know, we're gonna start an MSP, right? So basically, to deal with the small business, basically the CDC standing behind it, but then basically incorporate it into security. I mean, it's just it's a business waiting to happen in this town. You know, so what I do appreciate, you know, Rick, I mean, you know, first of all, I was thinking, it's great that we can have this conversation right here in this town, you know, something we couldn't have a few years back, you know, so the knowledge that exists right here. And, you know, you know, as we grow, basically, you know, these are all opportunities for business people to kind of get into technical business, you know, and you know, develop a base, you know, and you talk about, you know, I was talking to one of the MSP, you know, CEOs and founders, and he said, well, you know, our margins are low. I said, but you can move into higher margin stuff, because once you've got the audience, you know, you've already got basically 100 clients. You know, they're ready as they grow. They're not static. Some might, okay, 20 might go away, but 80 are going to grow, right? You're well positioned. So my point to him was, you know, and by the way, when we get to $1 million, there's 3 people who are going to be coming in to knock on the door to buy you, right? I mean, that's the development community. So just kind of look out and basically say who's coming. They're already buying HVAC companies and contractors, and they're just going to come step. You know, we're in a very acquisitive time. So, but I think the demystifying technology is that's you can't have a decision maker who's like kind of eyes glazed over in the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I think if, you know, just to wrap it up, there's one story I actually heard this morning. I found it very interesting. But as you think about abstraction, as you think about making technology easier, there's also a downside to that, because people click without thinking, right? They don't understand the underlying technology and what can happen when they take an action. And training and culture, and the example that I heard this morning I thought was very applicable, because it was interesting. It was a friend who wanted to get his other friend out of jail earlier. So he identified the system, online access, and he began to social engineer a way to get into the system to modify the release date of his buddy. Now, the interesting thing about it, you talk about training and you talk about culture, he went through 3 different rounds of different ways to get people to click on a link to get access, so that somebody would type their username and password in, and then he would have access to the system that he could then exploit it and make modification. He didn't get it until the 3rd round. Now, question, when you've got employees who all seem to be getting the same type of calls, the same type of emails about some system and some problem, and it's repetitive, it should throw a flag up to your employees to say something. Now, what actually caught the guy was, after he got access to the system, after he exploited it and modified the record, an internal system kicked off an audit event which flagged an investigation, and then they caught the guy. Right? So technology still got him, but it should have never gotten to that point. Right? And my thing going back to that is the abstraction, the easiness of things. Right? The social engineering aspect and the culture is very key to winning this war. Right? The technology can be there, but who knows what he could have done had he identified, taken a little bit more steps, been a little bit more patient. Who knows what could have happened in situations like that. And we're all vulnerable to the same thing.
But that brings up another point. We cannot rely on one thing
Yep.
is the fence by death. or whatever, even though they cracked the first layer, there was something else that was
Mhm.
sitting there that actually caught the issue.
Yes. Yeah, and that's at defense in depth. And are you actually paying attention to the alert that kicked off, right? Or has it become spam to you because you have too many incidents?
Thank you, Rick.
Oh, yes, sir.
This is-
We'll keep talking.